I remember the moment like it was yesterday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my children playing in the next room, when everything changed. My world, our world, came crashing down. I had always believed that my marriage was perfect. My husband, William, was everything I thought I wanted. We had built a life together that seemed unbreakable. But what would you do if you found out your perfect spouse wasn't who they said they were? That the man you trusted had been living a double life all along? A fraud. A bigamist. A convicted criminal. How could I have been so blind? This is my story. The story of how I discovered the truth. The story of how I learned that the man I loved wasn't who he claimed to be. It's not just a tale of betrayal, it's a journey of survival, strength, and starting over, no matter how impossible that seemed at the time. How did I uncover the shocking truth about my husband? How did I find the strength to rebuild my life after everything I thought I knew was shattered? Let me take you through this painful, yet empowering journey. Let me show you how I turned my life around, piece by piece, after the truth came crashing down. Before we dive deeper into this story today, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this journey, and give this video thumbs up. Your support energized us for sharing these intimate stories, and remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episodes. My name is Mary Turner Thompson. I'm a mother, a businesswoman, and, for a time, a wife. I live in Edinburgh, Scotland, a city full of history and beauty, but for me, it's also a place where I learned to face one of the most difficult truths of my life. For a long time, I lived a life that seemed perfect, even enviable to others. But perfect is only an illusion, isn't it? It's a mask that can crack at the slightest touch, revealing something far darker beneath. I was successful in my career. I had a growing business and a steady life. On the surface, everything appeared to be in place. But beneath that, I had something else I desperately craved, something that I thought would complete me. Love. A family. A partner who would share my dreams and fears. I was no different than any other woman looking for a soulmate, someone to share my life with. I didn't think it was asking too much. I had been married before, and it hadn't worked out. But I was still hopeful. I had always believed in love, in finding someone who could be my equal, someone to stand by me through the highs and the lows. And so, when I met William Jordan, I thought I had found exactly that. It was the early 2000s. I was in my 30s, building my career, finding a rhythm with my work. I had 2 children, and while I loved them dearly, there was always a part of me that yearned for a partner. Someone to share the load of life. I wasn't the type of woman who sought perfection in others, but I did crave the comfort of security, the kind of security that comes from having someone by your side who is solid, dependable, and most importantly, trustworthy. I had met William online in 2000, and I remember how it all began. We exchanged messages back and forth, getting to know each other through words. He was charming, funny, and incredibly attentive. He made me feel like I mattered. His messages were thoughtful, and his words made me feel like I had finally found someone who saw me for who I was, not just as a mother or a businesswoman, but as a person deserving of love and respect. We hit it off immediately. The first time we spoke on the phone, I remember feeling a rush of excitement. His voice was warm, soothing, and confident. He told me about his work, something to do with government projects, something important. I was impressed. He seemed like he had it all figured out, and I admired that. It was exactly what I wanted in a partner, someone with ambition, someone who was successful, someone who could offer me the security I had always wanted. We didn't waste time. Our connection felt real, and we moved fast. By 2002, we were married. It felt like a whirlwind romance, and I was swept up in it. He was everything I had ever dreamed of, a partner, a best friend, a lover. I never imagined that beneath this man, beneath his gentle touch and kind words, there would be a world of lies waiting to break me. Looking back, I realized just how much was at stake. It wasn't just my heart that was on the line, it was my entire life. My children, my career, my financial security, all of it was tied to this man who I thought was the love of my life. The betrayal I experienced wasn't just emotional, it was psychological. It was financial. It was everything I thought I knew about trust, about love, completely ripped away. And I was left wondering, how could I have been so blind? How did I miss the signs? What was he hiding, and how had I let him weave this web of lies around me, so expertly that I couldn't see it? I had always prided myself on being strong, independent, and wise. But when I fell in love with William, I allowed myself to lower my guard. I trusted him completely, without question. And that trust, well, it would cost me dearly. It would change the course of my life in ways I could never have imagined. When I started to uncover the truth about William, it wasn't just about finding out that he had lied to me about his past. It wasn't just about the fact that he had a hidden family, or that he was married to someone else while he was with me. It wasn't just the financial fraud, the money he had convinced me to give him under false pretenses. What really shattered me was the realization that I had been emotionally manipulated for years. I had been living a life built on lies, and that reality was more painful than I ever could have imagined. This wasn't just a story of a broken heart. It was the story of a woman whose life, trust, and future had been hijacked by someone who, at first glance, seemed like the perfect partner. And it was only when everything came crumbling down that I began to see how deeply this man had hurt me. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If I didn't find a way to navigate through the lies, if I didn't find the strength to confront the truth, I would lose everything. My children would lose their family. My career would be destroyed. And I would be left with nothing but the devastation of betrayal, wondering how I could have missed all the warning signs. But I had no choice. I had to keep going, I had to uncover every lie, every secret, no matter how painful it was to face. And I would rebuild my life, no matter what. The scene is now set. The stakes are high. This is not just a story of betrayal, it's a story of survival. What would you do if you realized everything you believed about your life was a lie? This is the journey I embarked on when I uncovered the truth about William, and it's one I'll never forget. It's hard to believe now, but when I first met William in 2000, I was cautiously optimistic. I had been through my share of relationships, some good, some bad, but nothing had ever felt like it did when I started talking to him. It was one of those online dating sites, where I had gone with an open heart but a cautious mind. I wasn't looking for perfection, but I was looking for honesty, connection, someone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone in the world. The first few messages came through, and right away, there was something magnetic about his words. He wrote with such care, like he was really listening to me, like he understood me in a way I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't the generic, "Hey, you're beautiful," lines I was used to hearing. He asked questions that made me feel like he genuinely wanted to know who I was, what I cared about, and what I had been through. I could tell he was well-spoken and articulate, and that caught my attention. There was depth to him. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? After a few weeks of messaging back and forth, we decided to speak on the phone. I remember hearing his voice for the first time, and it was like the warmth of his words came to life. He had this charm about him, smooth but not overbearing. His voice had a confidence to it, but it was a warm kind of confidence, the kind that made you feel at ease. He spoke about his work, how busy he was, how important his job was. He didn't go into too many details, but there was always a hint of mystery, of something big and important in his life that I just assumed had to do with his career. We hit it off instantly. And I couldn't help but think, this is it. This is the man I've been waiting for. For a while, it felt like I was living in a dream. Every conversation, every moment spent together felt new, exciting, like we were two pieces that perfectly fit together. We made plans to meet in person, and when that day came, it was everything I imagined. The moment I laid eyes on him, I felt a flutter in my chest. He was even more attractive in person, and just as charming. I remember thinking, I've finally found my match. We spent hours talking that day, and after only a few dates, we were inseparable. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind of love that felt like it could last forever. We would talk for hours on the phone late into the night, laughing and sharing our hopes, our dreams, and our fears. It was easy to be with him. He made me feel special. He made me feel like I was seen in a way I had never felt before. Within a year of meeting, we were talking about getting married. It felt right. I had 2 young children, and William was wonderful with them, almost as if he had always been a part of our family. He was patient, kind, and involved. He would take them out to the park, play games with them, and even help with their schoolwork. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, someone who could be a father figure to my kids, someone who could be the foundation we all needed. We decided to marry in 2002. It wasn't a grand wedding, but it was perfect for us. Our families came together, and we celebrated in a small ceremony. We were a family now, complete. There was love, there was hope, and there was the promise of a bright future ahead of us. My life was falling into place in a way I had always dreamed. Looking back now, I realize just how quickly he gained my trust. There was a sincerity to William that was almost disarming. He seemed so invested in me, in my life, in my children. He wanted to know everything about my past, my family, my friends, my dreams, my fears. It was like he was trying to be a part of every aspect of my world. And at first, I thought that was a good thing. I thought, this is what love is supposed to feel like. He would always do things that made me feel secure, little gestures that made me believe in the life we were building. If something was bothering me, he would listen. If I needed help with the kids, he was there, always willing to lend a hand. It wasn't just about love, it was about partnership. He made me feel like I could count on him for anything. I had never met anyone like him. He was confident, ambitious, and yet, he was always so humble. I admired him for his strength, his ability to take charge of situations. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He was always a little vague when it came to his work, never sharing too many details. He'd mention long hours, projects with high-level clients, and the importance of the work he was doing. At the time, I took it all at face value. Why wouldn't I? He seemed so accomplished, so capable, so utterly trustworthy. It was easy to believe that he had a demanding career, especially when he explained how much he had to travel for work. He often told me about meetings and top-secret projects that kept him away from home for days at a time. I had no reason to question him. I was in love. I wanted to believe that everything was perfect. He was my partner, my rock. He had become someone I couldn't imagine my life without. And as the years went by, the more I trusted him. He took on responsibilities in our family with ease, balancing his high-level work with his role as a father figure to my children. I remember when he would come home after a long trip, his arms always open, always eager to embrace us. I didn't think twice about his absences. They were just part of his work, I assumed. He was doing it for us. For our future. It wasn't until later that I began to notice the subtle things, small cracks in the facade that I had ignored. William's absences began to feel more frequent, more pronounced. At first, I wrote it off. He would explain that his work was demanding, that he had clients all over the world who needed his attention. I understood. After all, we had a comfortable life. He was providing for us in ways I hadn't imagined possible. But over time, those trips became harder to ignore. He would leave for days at a time, sometimes a week or more, without much explanation. He told me his work took him to places where phones and emails were off limits, areas that required full attention. It sounded plausible, even important. But as the weeks went by, I began to feel something uneasy stirring in the pit of my stomach. Why was he gone so often? And why was he always so vague when I asked for more details? I remember the first time I questioned him directly. It was after a long trip to the US, where he was gone for nearly 2 weeks. When he returned, he was distant, distracted. I asked him about his trip, and he responded in a way that felt rehearsed. He told me he had been working with top government officials and couldn't discuss the specifics of his meetings. He even mentioned that he had been working on classified projects. It sounded like a movie, a little too perfect, a little too convenient. But I didn't question him. I was in love, and I believed in him. I tried to shake the feeling, the nagging suspicion that maybe I was missing something. But I didn't want to believe it. The life we had was everything I had ever dreamed of. I didn't want to face the reality that I could be wrong about him. I wanted to believe that his love was real, that our family was strong, that everything would work out just as we had planned. I never could have imagined just how much I was about to lose. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? It all began with a phone call. A simple, unexpected call that would shake my entire world. It was in 2006, and everything seemed to be going well, at least, that's what I thought. William had been gone on yet another trip for work, and I was home, trying to keep the kids entertained while running my business. It was a busy time, but that call caught me completely off guard. The phone rang, and when I picked it up, I heard a woman's voice on the other end. She sounded calm, measured, but there was something in her tone that made my stomach drop. "Is this Mary Turner Thompson?" she asked. I confirmed it was me, wondering who this could be. What followed, however, is something I'll never forget. The woman, with a voice that trembled ever so slightly, introduced herself as Louise. She didn't waste any time. "I need to tell you something about your husband. William Jordan is married to me too," she said. At first, I thought I was hearing things. I was in shock, and it took a moment for the words to fully process. "What are you talking about?" "William is my husband. We've been together for years. We have children together," I stammered. The woman on the other end calmly explained that she was, in fact, married to William. Not just that, she was his second wife, and he had been living a double life. She explained that they had been married for nearly as long as William and I had been. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but it wasn't just the shock of hearing this woman's voice. It was the fact that William, my William, had been hiding another marriage from me for so long. She gave me enough details that were impossible to ignore, and said she was trying to get in touch with me to make sure I knew the truth. "He's been lying to both of us," she said, as if the words should comfort me somehow. "I'm sorry, Mary, but he's been leading us both on." Her voice cracked at the end, revealing a hint of the pain she was feeling too. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I stood there, frozen for a long time, staring at the receiver in my hand. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. Could this be true? Could William, the man I trusted above all others, really be leading two lives? I couldn't even process it. How could I have not seen it? Why hadn't I noticed the warning signs before now? After that call, everything changed. I couldn't look at William the same way again. My trust in him was shattered, but the worst part was not knowing what was real anymore. I had spent years building my life around him. Everything I believed about our relationship, about our family, was now called into question. I tried to tell myself it wasn't true, that maybe this woman had made a mistake or was some kind of fraud trying to cause trouble. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I started to obsess over every little detail of our life together. The trips he'd taken, the hours he spent on the phone, the times he'd come back from his business trips and seemed a little too distant, a little too quiet. I had ignored those little red flags for so long. Now, they were all I could see. I began to dig. I had to know the truth, even if it meant facing the unbearable reality of what my life had been. I went through his things when he wasn't around, his email, his phone records, even the messages he'd left on the answering machine. It wasn't easy. It felt like I was violating his privacy, but I had to know. I had to find proof. The more I searched, the more I found. There were emails between him and the woman, Louise, messages that were affectionate, messages that confirmed their relationship. There were pictures, too, pictures of William with her, smiling and happy, as if their marriage was just as real as mine. But it didn't stop there. I found something even worse. There were financial records that didn't add up. Money he had sent to her over the years. He had always claimed to be so careful with our finances, yet I found large sums of money being transferred out of our accounts. There were receipts for hotels, for flights to places I had never been. I felt nauseous as I pieced it together. It was all adding up, every detail, every lie. The worst part was the emotional manipulation. I realized how expertly William had played me. He had been feeding me a story of importance, of top-secret government work, of long hours and late nights. He had convinced me that his frequent absences, his lack of transparency, were all part of the job. I had believed him because I wanted to. I wanted to believe in the man I married. But now, it felt like I had been manipulated into trusting him, into believing a story that was nothing but an elaborate facade. The deeper I dug, the more I saw the web of lies that had been spun around me. It wasn't just about the other woman, it was about how deeply William had embedded himself in my life, in my mind, and how he had expertly turned every doubt I had into a reason to trust him more. He had made me feel that I was the crazy one for questioning him. It was a classic tactic of emotional manipulation, and I had fallen for it completely. I remembered the times when I'd asked him about his frequent absences, when I'd asked why he couldn't share more about his work, why he had to disappear for days at a time. He would brush it off with a smile, tell me it was just a part of the job, and I would believe him. He always had an answer that made perfect sense in the moment. I was so desperate to believe him, to believe in our future, that I ignored my own instincts. And now, here I was, standing in the middle of a life I had built, looking at the pieces and realizing that I didn't know who I had been living with all these years. Who was William Jordan really? And how could I have been so blind? I felt betrayed in ways I couldn't even begin to articulate. This wasn't just about another woman, it was about everything I had ever known about trust and love crumbling before my eyes. I could feel the weight of the truth settling on me, a truth that I couldn't escape. It was like a heavy fog had descended, and I was struggling to see through it. I had to confront him. I had to face the man who had lied to me, the man I thought I knew, the man who had been living a completely different life behind my back. The pain was unbearable. Every moment spent in denial was a moment wasted. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I had to confront him, and I had to do it soon, before I lost everything. The stakes were now undeniable. Every lie, every secret, had been uncovered, and it was time to face the man who had betrayed me in ways I never could have imagined. As I sat there, holding the evidence in my hands, I knew there was no going back. The truth was out, and I had no choice but to confront it head-on. But I still didn't know what the next steps would be, or how I would ever rebuild from the wreckage of my life. All I knew was that I had to confront William, no matter the cost. The truth had to come to light, and I had to be the one to uncover it. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? The weight of what I had uncovered began to sink in, piece by painful piece. I had already discovered the truth about William's second marriage, about the woman he had been living with under the guise of another life. But what I hadn't yet known, the truth that made my stomach twist and my heart race, was how deeply he had deceived not just me, but everyone around him. It was one evening, not long after I had started digging through his belongings, that I stumbled upon something that would change everything. I was going through some old papers in the drawer of our office when I found a folder that didn't belong. It wasn't his, of that I was sure. As I opened it, my hands shook. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and a handful of letters. But it was the next document that froze me in place. It was a court record. The name on the paper was unmistakable, William Jordan. The details were damning. I scanned through the legal documents, barely able to process the words on the page. It was a criminal record. My husband, the man I had shared my life with, had been convicted of fraud, multiple counts, and bigamy, and even more shockingly, sexual assault. My world stopped moving for a moment. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stared at the paper, my mind struggling to make sense of it. How could this be? How could the man I trusted with my children's lives, with my heart, have such a past? My head spun as I read through the legal proceedings. William had been convicted years ago, but somehow, he had kept it hidden, buried under layers of lies, lies so thick that I hadn't even scratched the surface until now. The fraud charges were only the beginning. His history was riddled with deceit. But the real horror came when I saw his criminal conviction. A conviction for sexual assault. He had preyed on vulnerable women, manipulated them, and used his charm and confidence to create the illusion of a perfect man. I was living with a man who was not only a criminal, but a predator. I felt nauseous. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I had married this man. I had given him my trust, my love, my family. And this was the truth I had been blind to. How had I been so naive? How had I let him get so close to my children, to me? Every detail of our relationship now seemed tainted, every moment colored by the darkness of his deception. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it end with just this. I needed to know more, to understand the full extent of his lies, to uncover everything he had hidden from me. I began to search more frantically, piecing together bits of information wherever I could. It was during one of these searches that I found more details about his other families, not just Louise, but 2 other women. He had been leading multiple secret lives across different cities, each time playing the role of the devoted husband, the loving father. And each time, he disappeared when the truth came too close. The discovery felt like a slap to my soul. He had destroyed every ounce of trust one had placed in him, and yet he had done it so effortlessly, so calculatedly. This wasn't just a case of a man being unfaithful, this was a man who had systematically built a web of lies, who had deceived not just me, but every woman he came into contact with. And I was just one in a long line of victims. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? As the full scope of his betrayal unfolded before me, I felt like I was losing myself in the wreckage of my life. I had been so sure of everything. I had thought our family was secure, that our future was mapped out. But now, I had nothing. The man I loved had stolen my peace of mind, my security, and my belief in the future. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the faces of the women I didn't know, the children I didn't know existed. My mind spiraled, trying to process it all. How could I have been so blind? How could I have given my love, my trust, to someone who had been living a lie for years? The hardest part wasn't just the betrayal, it was the toll it took on my children. They didn't understand what was happening, but they felt it. I could see it in their eyes when they asked about their father's disappearance again, when they asked why he couldn't be home more often. They were too young to understand the complexities of what was going on, but they knew something was wrong. They saw the emotional weight on my shoulders. They felt the tension in the air, the sadness that had replaced the warmth we used to have. After our meeting, I contacted the police. I knew I had to take action, not just for me, but for the other women he had deceived. I couldn't allow him to continue to get away with this. I didn't want anyone else to go through what I had endured. Working with the authorities, we gathered all the evidence, his criminal record, the emails, the financial transactions, and the testimonies from other victims who had come forward. The truth was undeniable. The case against him was solid, and in late 2006, William Jordan was arrested for multiple charges, including bigamy, fraud, and sexual assault. The trial was a long, drawn-out affair, and it felt like I was reliving every moment of the betrayal all over again. But through it all, I held my head high. I had faced the truth, and now it was time for William to do the same. In the end, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to prison. It was a bittersweet victory for me. I had wanted justice, but no sentence could ever undo the damage he had caused. After everything came to light, I thought I would never find peace. The aftermath was almost more difficult than the discovery itself. The emotional toll, the public exposure, and the constant reminders of the betrayal, it was all overwhelming. But the hardest part was looking at my children. How could I explain all of this to them? How could I ever make them understand what had happened? The days that followed were dark. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of questions, anger, and pain. But in those quiet, painful moments, I realized something crucial: I couldn't let William's lies define me. I had spent so many years being manipulated, but now it was time to take back control of my life. I had to rebuild, not just for me, but for my children, who had been dragged into this mess despite their innocence. I started by seeking therapy. I needed help. I needed to learn how to navigate through the pain, to understand why I had allowed myself to be deceived, and to heal from the trauma of betrayal. Slowly, the weight began to lift. I started to feel like myself again, strong, capable, and determined. I found solace in my work, in my children, and in the new friends I made, people who saw me for who I truly was, not for the woman I had been married to. I also started to speak out, sharing my story with others. I wrote articles, spoke at events, and connected with other women who had experienced similar betrayals. It was empowering to know that I wasn't alone in this. I began to build a new community, one that was based on honesty, trust, and mutual support. The more I shared my story, the more I realized how many women had been deceived by men like William. I became an advocate for those who had fallen victim to manipulation and fraud. I wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was possible. And with every step forward, I found healing. My children and I started to thrive again, slowly but surely. They may never fully understand the depth of the pain I went through, but they saw the strength it took to rise above it. Over time, I began to feel peace, a peace that came from knowing I had faced the truth, fought for justice, and emerged stronger than I ever thought possible. I may have been deceived, but I was no longer a victim. I had reclaimed my life, and that was something no one could ever take away from me. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I can say with confidence that I am a different person than I was when this all began. The woman who believed in the perfect life, the perfect love, is gone. But in her place is someone who understands the importance of self-trust, resilience, and the power of truth. I've rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal, and while the scars remain, they no longer define me. They remind me that I am stronger than I ever knew. And now, with a new sense of purpose, I continue to raise my children, to advocate for others who have been deceived, and to live a life rooted in authenticity and love. I'm no longer defined by the lies of the past. I'm defined by the strength I've found in the truth. Rebuilding life wasn't just about recovering from the lies, it was about becoming the person I was always meant to be. And for that, I will always be grateful. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? When I look back at the years that followed the discovery of William's lies, I can say without a doubt that the journey hasn't been easy, but it has been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. The person I was before I learned the truth about him is not the person I am now. I've come to understand that resilience is not about being unshakable, it's about rising after every fall, finding strength where you thought none existed, and continuing to fight even when everything seems lost. In the years since the trial and William's conviction, I've found healing in ways I never imagined. I've worked hard to rebuild my life, not just for myself but for my children, who have been through so much. But something more came from this experience, something I never expected, a desire to help others. I wrote a book about my journey, about what it felt like to be deceived, about how it took every ounce of strength I had to confront the truth and rebuild. My book, Trust Betrayed, A Journey of Lies, Loss, and Redemption, became a way for me to share not just my pain, but also my survival. I wanted to give people the tools to trust their instincts, to recognize the signs of manipulation, and to walk away from toxic relationships before it's too late. The book has helped many women who found themselves in similar situations, and I've had the honor of hearing from so many who told me that reading my story made them feel less alone. Public speaking became another way for me to channel my strength. I started speaking at conferences and events focused on relationship abuse, fraud, and emotional manipulation. I shared my experience in the hope that others could learn from my mistakes, that they could avoid the same traps I fell into. Through my talks, I reached out to people who had been through similar heartbreaks, offering them the hope and courage to rebuild, just as I did. Every time I stood on stage, I felt more empowered, more in control of my story, and less like a victim of my circumstances. I've built a new life. One filled with purpose, one where I've learned to trust myself again. No one can ever take that away from me. No one can strip me of the strength I've found in myself. I no longer live in the shadows of William's deceit. I've chosen to live in the light, embracing every opportunity that comes my way, and helping others do the same.